again.
Hey, welcome everyone to StoryTrading Weekly Meetup. It's been a tumultuous week and a kind of scary time for the markets, but that does not mean you stop doing your research. We still do that here at StoryTrading. Look at our fundamentals, sentiment, catalysts, and technicals so we can stay informed and make the best trading and investment decisions possible. Tonight, we got an update on VIP Pick BioCryst Pharma BCRX by Zach Keller. We'll come to him in just a few minutes. But first, we need to go over some logistics. So we're going to share my screen right here with everybody. And here we go with the show. We start with our disclaimer. StoryTrading is not an investment advisor. Investing in securities involves significant risk of loss. If you're watching the replay on YouTube after a 1 week embargo period, you can a little more about StoryTrading. StoryTrading is the practice of understanding market pricing through the lens of our 4 pillars: fundamentals, catalysts, sentiment, and technicals. We collaborate as a community together on WhatsApp and on Zoom, and we're building our own iOS and Android app. If you'd like to get involved in the beta testing of that app, go over to our website and sign up for that. At our website, storytrading.com, you can see the VIP picks. These are picks coming from our community. In this case, BioCryst was initially chosen by Sultan Beardsley of MS Money Moves, and he's moved on from that pick, but we found the champion in it with Zach Keller, and he kind of took it over. So BioCryst, you can see, is $13.78, market cap $2.48 billion. This stock is up 245% since August 30th, 2020. More importantly, it's had some relative strength since the market drawdown. I don't have the exact number, but I did it over the weekend. I think it was like around 24% down from the peak, which is pretty good, being up 244% still. And as we said, Zach has taken the torch here from Sultan and providing our community with updates on BioCryst. Here's the chart, and you can see there's a long-term chart looking at weekly candles. Been a little bit of, you see this pullback right here? I don't know if you can see my mouse. There it is, like right there. So that kind of correlates with ARK risk assets getting pummeled. But then you can see the rebound, strong rebound the last several weeks. And that's because of a lot of extremely big catalysts coming out for the stock. And that's why we had asked Zach to come on and give us an update. So in his presentation today, we hope to get an update on fundamentals, on catalysts and sentiment and technicals. And whatever he's not an expert in, we fill in the gaps in the ensuing days and weeks in our community. And that helps us get the big picture on the story behind the trade with BioCryst. So I'm really interested to know if this stock might be able to buck the trend, or maybe it gets hit, at the market declines, but maybe it's a stock you don't mind holding while it gets hit because it's going to bounce back a lot harder. And that's what we hope to learn here from Zach tonight. Zach, how you doing? Welcome to the show.
Doing all right. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. It's a pleasure to have you. I'm excited for the presentation. I took a little peek at it and it looked great.
Great. I appreciate that. I guess I just need to get, let's see, how do I get the PowerPoint back up on the screen here? All right. Hey, everybody. I'm Zach Keller. I'm one of the moderators for the BCRX room on StoryTrading on WhatsApp. My disclaimer: I am not a financial advisor. This is not financial advice, and basically don't listen to anything I say. But a little bit about me: I'm actually an orthopedic physical therapist. I live in Dallas, Texas. And I would not say that I typically invest in biotech stock companies, or biotech stocks rather. I'm very interested in health and healthcare in general and wellness. And I got interested in this stock after Sultan Beardsley's presentation, which was well over a year ago, I think. And so anyways, let's get right into it. So BCRX, 2.5 billion market cap biotech company that specializes in rare disease therapeutics, specifically oral prophylactic treatments for rare diseases. And that's the fact that it's oral prophylactic is really key. And we'll get into that as we go. Just some facts about the company. And then the price close of $13.78 last Friday. If you look at it over the past month, it was actually right around the high 13s 1 month ago, and it went down to about 1160, 1150, something like that. And then after the positive news on January 10th, which we'll talk about throughout the course of this, it shot up to about $17 in 2 days, and has since come back down to the high 13s. So we're exactly where we were a month ago, except there was some good trading opportunities kind of shoved in there. So for the purpose of this presentation, we'll be focusing on two of their drugs, Orladeyo and BCX 9930. One of the reasons I don't typically invest in biotechs is because of the risk associated with investing in a company that has a drug in trials that may never materialize. And unlike a lot of biotechs that are speculatory based on a hopeful blockbuster drug in the pipeline, BCRX already has a drug on the market in Orladeyo, which was approved by the FDA in December of 2020 to treat HAE. So Orladeyo alone is going to make them profitable in the near future, but the thing that everybody's excited about is their factor D inhibitor, BCX 9930, which has 8 different indications for treatment. They're currently in a phase 3 trial for PNH, and they're in 3 separate phase 2 trials for different nephritis indications. Let's see here. So what is HAE? HAE is hereditary angioedema, and the estimates vary, but anywhere between 6,000 and 10,000 people in the US have this. It's a rare disease that affects about 1 in 50,000 people in the entire world, characterized by recurrent attacks of angioedema without rash, redness, or itchiness. HAE attacks cause mild to severe swelling of various areas of the body, including the extremities, face, genitals, GI tract, and upper airway. So you can imagine, obviously, having a lot of swelling, in the face or genitals doesn't sound very pleasant, but really it's the upper airway. When you think about how this can actually be threatening to a person, if they're having swelling in the upper airway and they can't breathe, that becomes a very dangerous situation. The cause of this is either genetic absence or faulty performance of a C1 esterase inhibitor in the blood. And basically, if you don't have this, there's kind of a complex series of events that leads to your blood vessels releasing too much fluid and causing this localized swelling and pain of an HAE attack. So, excuse me, standard of care for HAE has been a combination of injectables and IV infusions. These do have, I said superior efficacy. It has mildly better efficacy, but the problem is it's very unpleasant and time consuming. So, if you think about it, if you have to go get an IV infusion to treat something, you have to make an appointment, you have to show up somewhere, you have to sit there for quite a long time while you get the infusion. And it's not very pleasant. So the 3 drugs, we've got Hygarda, Takazero, and Cinrizi, and it's got their efficacy there. When you're comparing Orladeyo to this, their initial 24-week data only showed a 44% reduction in the rate of an HAE attack. However, when they came out with newer data, and this was I think in the fall, actually, it was looking at weeks 25 through 96 of the same study, and it showed an 80% reduction of mean number of HAE attacks per month. So this is very, very similar to the efficacy that you get with the current standard of care, but it's a lot more convenient because you're literally taking a pill orally, as opposed to having to go in and get injections or infusions. It's currently approved in the US, the EU, the UK, United Arab Emirates, and Japan. Regulatory applications have been accepted in Canada and Switzerland, but these are still pending. And they have secured reimbursement approval in Norway. Launches are underway in Germany, France, Japan, and United Arab Emirates. One thing that's important to note is that they have patent protection through October of 2039. So this is not something that's going to be a generic drug anytime soon. One thing that I think is a good resource, and I put this in the VIP room before the presentation, is a presentation by Third Eye Holdings. If you want to do a really, really deep dive on these drugs and the biochemistry of everything, this is an excellent resource. For the sake of going over this tonight, it would be way, way too extensive to cover. But I did get some of these figures from the Third Eye Holdings presentation. And the total addressable market in the US is 4.85 billion. This is based on 10,000 patients in the US. If you use a more conservative figure of 6,000 patients, the total addressable market in the US is 2.9 billion. So anywhere basically from 2.9 to 4.9 billion in the US. The reimbursement rate is $485,000 annually per patient in the US. So not a lot of people have this, but the reimbursement rate is so incredibly high that you can generate massive revenue off of this. The reimbursement rate in the EU is about half of what it is in the US, and I'm not exactly sure. It's less in Japan, but I don't know what percentile less it is. But if they just capture a modest percentage of the US alone, it's going to be massive. The US prescriber base is growing. They were guiding for 115 to 120 million in net revenues for 2021, but they actually ended up with a slight beat of 122 million. The US sales in Orladeyo were basically all the sales of Orladeyo in 2021, but that's going to change in 2022 as some of these rollouts occur in other countries. So this was one of the interesting things about the Q3 earnings. Their CEO said that their confidence each quarter is getting stronger, that they're going to substantially exceed their global peak sales target of 500 million. So previously, going back, what they had said in prior quarters was that global peak sales for Orladeyo was going to be around 500 million. Then after Q3, they said it's going to substantially exceed 500 million. Which doesn't really tell you how much, but then on January 10th of this year, they came out and said that global peak sales are going to be $1 billion. So in a very short amount of time, they have really ramped up their confidence in what they're going to be able to do with Orladeyo. Another thing about rolling out in the UK, their regulatory board there has recommended Orladeyo for patients having 2 or more HAE attacks a month. And that opens Orladeyo up to a broader range because the other prophylactics are only covered for patients having 2 or more a week. So when you think about that, that's a very severe group of patients, the people that are having 2 or more a week. And Orladeyo is being recommended for those having, anywhere up to or anywhere down to 2 a month. So it's a much bigger patient population that this drug is being recommended to in the UK. Let's talk a little bit about BCX 9930. This is their factor D inhibitor. So again, this is an oral therapy for a condition that other drugs exist for, but they're IV or injections. So it's an oral therapy for complement-mediated diseases. And this is another instance where I would refer to the Third Eye Holdings presentation. They've got about 4 pages in there that go over the biochemistry of complement-mediated diseases in very, very fine detail. So there's 8 different potential indications for BCX 9930, 2 for hematology, 1 of which is PNH, 3 for rheumatology, and 3 for nephrology. So those are the 3 phase 2 nephritis indications that I referred to earlier. So they're currently in a phase 3 trial for PNH, one of the hematology indications, and they were accelerated to a phase 3 trial after the results of their proof of concept study. So what is PNH? So PNH is paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria. That's a hard word to say. Estimates vary, but around 20,000 patients worldwide. And it's a disorder due to defective bone marrow producing red blood cells with compromised structural integrity. So basically, you've got these faulty red blood cells. And the end result of this is chronic hemolysis, which is basically like the red blood cell self-destructing. And that can lead to a lot of problems. It includes blood clots in a decent amount of the population, and then more commonly, anemia. So, which makes sense because we need hemoglobin to carry oxygen to our tissues and organ systems. If we have less red blood cells, we have less hemoglobin, which means you're not getting oxygen to your tissues. One way that anemia is treated is with red blood cell transfusions. So this is a very, very invasive thing when you think about it. You have this hemolysis, your red blood cells are basically destroying themselves, so you become anemic, and then you actually have to go get a transfusion of somebody else's blood just to get your hemoglobin count up. So let's look at the proof of concept studies for BCX 9930 for PNH. There were two groups in this study. There was a C5 inhibitor naive group and a C5 non-responder group. And what that means is, so C5 inhibitor would be the classification of drugs that you would use currently to treat PNH. So one group was C5 inhibitor naive, meaning they're just like a blank slate. They've never tried that before. And then you have a C5 non-responder group. So a group of people who have tried a C5 inhibitor in the past and just didn't do well with it. So the primary endpoints of the study were change in hemoglobin and then whether or not a RBC transfusion was required. And one of the criteria for inclusion in either group was that their hemoglobin levels had to be below 10 grams per deciliter. And then I've got on this slide right here what the normal ranges are for males and females. So in the C5 inhibitor naive group, the results were fantastic. They had a mean change from baseline hemoglobin of 3.5 grams per deciliter. So when you think about that, you could have a female in the study who has 9 grams per deciliter, and after doing this is up to 12.5 grams per deciliter, which would actually put her in the normal range. 100% of the participants through week 24 were transfusion free. So that's big. When you look at the other group, when you look at the other group, so this was a C5 non-responder group. And the data is a little different here because you only had 6 patients. One of them had some pretty significant comorbidities and other illnesses that forced them to drop out of the study, and somebody else had to drop out of the study for personal reasons. Regardless, when you look at the end results of the study, they had a mean change in baseline hemoglobin from 2.3 grams per deciliter or 2.7 grams per deciliter if you exclude that one patient that had all the comorbidities. And then 80% of them were transfusion free through week 24. So this was basically the problematic group, the group that doesn't respond to C5 inhibitors, and they did relatively well, all things considered. So because of the results of this, they got bumped up to a phase 3 trial. Now, this next slide is looking at PNH competitors for BCRX. So there's actually a lot of drugs already that are either on the market or in phase 2 or phase 3 trials. This is one where I would go back to the Third Eye Holdings presentation. There's a page in there that literally compares every single one of these drugs to BCX 9930 and explains why BCX 9930 is better in each case. It's basically, it's more efficacious. And in the instance where there is a drug that has similar efficacy, BCX 9930 had less side effects. So it basically wins in every category. One thing that's, another thing that's important to point out, Soliris and Ultomiris, both Alexion drugs, are both IV drugs. So there's obviously a convenience factor there. Soliris has some type of a patent issue with Amgen. And so Alexion has been shoving all of their patients on the Ultomiris, which is now like 70% of their patients are taking. When you look at Alexion's revenue for 2020, it was $6 billion. And Soliris and Ultomiris were $5 billion of this, which is huge. And then Alexion was acquired by AstraZeneca in 2021 for $39 billion or $175 per share. So this could have some really meaningful implications for BCRX in the future if they wind up becoming the market leader in PNH because it's such a lucrative area. So financials, let's take a look at revenue. They did go ahead and release their preliminary revenue for Q4 coming from Orladeyo. We don't know what their total revenue will be, but they're going to do $45.6 million Q4 for 2021 from Orladeyo. So if we look at the past 3 quarters, from Q2 to Q3 and from Q3 to Q4, there's been about an 8.5 million increase roughly in revenue. The operating expenses is where things got a little out of hand. In Q3, their operating expenses were 79 million. And they took a pretty significant drop after Q3 earnings. It was around $15. It dropped to around $11.60. Their revenue was only a slight beat and their expenses were up significantly. So my take at the time was this is a knee-jerk reaction. Long-term investors should not be deterred. This was a buying opportunity. And it turns out that it was a buying opportunity because there was good news coming up shortly thereafter. The other thing they pointed out, though, in Q3 that seemed very, very positive was they ended the quarter with 204 million cash on hand and then access to an additional 75 million from Ethereum Capital because they hit a predefined Orladeyo milestone. And they stated that that was going to give them a cash runway into 2023. And they're going to draw that 75 million from Ethereum Capital in the middle of the year. But the fact that that was going to give them a cash runway into 2023 seemed pretty important. Then you get the November 22nd press release and insider purchases. So this is really big. On November 22nd, they announced that Royalty Pharma and OMERS Capital Markets provide 350 million in funding in exchange for royalties. So you've got the 204 million plus the 75 million that they're going to draw in the middle of this year, plus an additional 350 million in cash. So they're flush in cash right now, and this really should be able to fund their trials, fund their rollouts of Orladeyo, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But shortly thereafter, there was also some really big insider buys. So their CFO bought over 35,000 shares for greater than $400,000, and then they had a member of their board of directors buying 7,500 shares for about $91,000. So all of these events increasing, significantly increasing confidence in their future performance. Now, the stock was hanging around $13, higher 13s. It dropped down to 11 something, and then we get this January 10th press release. So, Orladeyo preliminary net revenue, we talked about that already, was 45.6 million, and they did 122 million Orladeyo revenue for the year. Then they announced that they think they're going to double their revenue in Orladeyo to no less than $250 million in 2022, and they expect peak sales to be $1 billion. We don't know when that'll be, but they feel pretty confident that they're going to do $1 billion in Orladeyo sales. They also kind of went into detail on adding new patients. They talked about the fact that they have about a 70% retention rate of patients on Orladeyo. It's being covered by all major payers. Their prescriber base is growing, and they also talked about enrollment in PNH patients for the REDEEM 1 and REDEEM 2 trials. That's the phase 3 trial looking at BCX 9930. So looking forward, their sales have grown roughly 8.5 million the past 2 quarters. If they continue to increase sales at 8 million per quarter, Orladeyo sales for 2022 will be around 262 million. I think this is very plausible given the rollouts in other countries. So right now their growth is exclusively in the US. At some point, and I don't think it's going to happen right away, but at some point that revenue growth in the US is going to start to, contract a little bit. And I think that's going to be mitigated by the simultaneous rollouts in other countries. So I don't think it's unrealistic that they exceed 250 million in revenue. It's really difficult to say when they could hit a billion in sales with Orladeyo. Maybe 2025, maybe 2026. It really just kind of depends on how the rollouts go in other countries. Their goal is to report data from the PNH trials over the next 2 years and prepare to submit for regulatory approval. So my thought or my opinion is that once they start getting midpoint data from BCX 9930 PNH trials, I think there'll be a buyout target. They're going to have a superior drug, or at least based on what we know so far, they're going to have a superior drug to Alexion, Amgen, and all those other companies that have competitors out there. So I think they very realistically become a buyout target when people start snooping around that midpoint data. Looking at 4 pillars, and then we'll talk about price target here in just a second. So fundamentals considerably better given the fact that they have this recent influx of cash from the royalty deals. You've got increasing revenue with Orladeyo sales. They should have no trouble funding trials for the drugs in the pipeline in the near term. So I really, really doubt that they would do an offering to raise cash at this point. And at some point long term, Orladeyo revenue should exceed operating expense. And we can talk a little bit about that too. I know that's kind of speculatory because we don't know what their operating expense is going to be for next year. I don't think they've guided for that, unless I just missed it. But I'm hopeful that in Q4 earnings, they'll give an idea of what they think operating expense will be for the next quarter. They did say though, when they had 204 million cash on hand and access to that 75 million from Ethereum Capital, that was going to give them a cash runway into 2023. So if they were talking about just exclusively that cash giving them a runway, and not factoring in additional cash from future revenues, then you could infer that expenses are not going to average more than 70 million per quarter. But again, I don't want to make that assumption because I think that's a lot to assume. Technicals, this is definitely not my area. I would definitely defer to Ben or Rex on this. Rex had tweeted, I think maybe a couple of weeks ago, that 20s are possible in the near future, but this for the market just pretty much shot itself in the foot. So I don't really know with the current climate of the market if they're going to be possible in the near future. But I do think that based on the way everything is looking, we have good buying opportunities right now. Sentiment. Obviously, this is improving very quick because we've had this flurry of positive news going back to November 22nd and kind of a clear sight as to what the company thinks peak sales will be for Orladeyo. And then finally, Catalyst. This is difficult to say because they've already started enrollment in Redeem 1 and Redeem 2, so we might not hear anything until they actually start that trial. And when you're dealing with things like this, sometimes trial enrollment can actually take a while. So we might not hear about that for several months. So the next catalyst might not be until Q4 earnings, which is probably going to be in about a month. And hopefully they're going to give some color on how trial enrollment is going, as well as rollouts for Orladeyo outside of the US. And then I think even more important would be getting an idea of what their operating expenses are going to be for the year of 2022. So price target. There's 12 analysts covering the stock with a price target range of anywhere from $13 to $30. The average is about $20. So even if you're just looking at that right there, we're at $13.78 right now. That's about almost a 50% increase from where we're sitting right now. So if you want to just go off of that, that seems pretty promising. I don't really have a short-term price target. And the reason is I think it depends on a lot of it. I don't have a price target, actually a long-term price target either, because there's too many contingencies. But if they execute on Orladeyo sales, I think short-term, the price target is, I don't see $20 being unrealistic at all, maybe $30, by the end of the year. But again, I'm not really getting into price targets on this because we don't really know what their expenses are going to be. Moving out beyond a year, we have to look at whether or not BCX 9930 gets approved. There's no reason to think that it won't, but we don't know that for a fact. And then also whether or not they decide to sell. So if somebody starts snooping around that data at midpoint and is looking at it with some interest, would they sell then? Now, I think they know what they have, and I don't think they're going to be inclined to sell unless it's for a really, really big premium. But we have to consider that as a possibility. They may sell earlier than we want, and we may not see the price appreciate to the extent that we want it to. There are biotech investors out there who think this could be $100 in the next 2 to 3 years based on the success of Orladeyo alone. Vivi the Bio Queen, I should probably give a plug for her. She's got a couple videos on YouTube where she talks about BCRX. And she thinks this has potential to be over $200 in 5 years. This is not unrealistic here. And the reason I say that is when you look at Alexion generating $5 billion in revenue for PNH, and BCRX is talking about $1 billion annually from Orladeyo when they hit peak sales. If they corner the market and they take a big part of Alexion's share because they've got a superior drug, and they're generating $5 billion in revenue from that, that's $6 billion in revenue, which is exactly what Alexion was doing when they got acquired by AstraZeneca for $39 billion. So 39 billion is 15.6 times what BCRX's market cap is right now. So you could see where that would make it potentially over $200 at some point. So the way I look at it right now is they are a 2.5 billion market cap company that is talking about doing 1 billion in peak sales for Orladeyo. And BCX 9930 has a chance to do much, much more than that in peak sales, not just from PNH, but because of the multiple indications that they'll be treating. So, you've got the phase 2 trials for the 3 different nephritis conditions. In a few years, if that's if that's on the market for those conditions, your peak sales are going to be through the roof. I think really the most important question right now is, what is a good entry point? And I think right now or in the near future might be a good time, given the behavior of the stock and then the market in general over the past month. That's really all I have got. So I'm welcome any questions that you might have.
Great. Thank you, Zach, for that awesome, comprehensive presentation. I didn't know you said you're an orthopedic doctor?
No, I'm an orthopedic physical therapist. So I work for a group of orthopedic surgeons, but yeah, I'm an outpatient ortho physical therapist.
Nice. Good. Get to know that background from you. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I want to give you a kudos on the sentiment, man. You got it right. A lot of people think that when story trading talks about sentiment, we're talking about people's emotions, and that's absolutely not what we're talking about. We're talking about real factors which can impact fundamentals longer term, right? So it's the qualitative part of fundamentals rather than the quantitative part of fundamentals. And I'm glad you got that right. I want to, go back to that November 22nd news release. I'm not sure if I missed it or you missed it, or there's a confusion about the cash price, the cash balance. But on November 22nd, I'm seeing that they were able to get $350 million in cash.
Right.
Is that built into that balance, cash balance you're talking about now?
No. So the cash balance that I was talking about was the 204 million they had cash on hand at the end of Q3. And then they had the right to draw another 75 million from Ethereum Capital, which will be the middle of this year. Then it was a couple weeks after that that they announced they're getting this influx of cash from Royalty Pharma and Omer. So basically, 204 plus 75, so roughly 280 million plus another 350 million in cash.
A lot.
Yes. Yeah. So they are flush with cash.
Right. And that 300 of that 350 million is not dilutive capital. That's upfront cash payment, and they're given up. It's like a royalty,
right? That
they're going to be given part of the revenue going forward.
Yeah. I'd have to look back at the slide. I don't have it right in front of me for the specific details, but yes, that sounds right.
Yeah, it looks like I don't know what's typical in this industry, but I'm reading it right now. For Royalty Pharma is going to be getting 3% of sales up to 1.5 billion, and 2% of sales between 1.5 and 3 billion, and no royalty over 3 billion. So it doesn't even last forever. So getting this 150 million upfront cash payment, no dilution, and they get these like royalties that don't last forever. Man, that's crazy.
Yeah.
And
big vote of confidence, from
exactly. I actually increased my position that day, November 22nd. I was surprised at the market. I'll pull up the chart soon and we'll talk about that. And then there was another 150 million from Omer's, a pension plan. And it looks like the terms were, a royalty of 7.5% on annual sales. Sorry, I'm not looking at the camera. I got to look on annual sales up to 350 million, 6% on sales between 350 and 550 million, and no royalty over 550 million, right? So again, non-dilutive 300 million. I mean, this is like a dream come true for a micro cap, and still is I don't know what, at 2.5 billion, but it's a small cap, right? So 300 million non-dilutive capital. I jumped all over that. And then in addition to that, they didn't have to do this, I don't think, but Royalty Pharma invested $50 million to buy shares at $13. And the stock that day, right? The stock that day was, when it was announced, was 11.89 when the news came out, and they're buying at a premium at $13, right?
Right.
Man, I don't know why the market wasn't more bullish. It hit 12.95 the next day, and then
Yeah.
it went down, and everyone forgot about it for a week. And then, the rest of the story. In fact, let me share the screen. I'll show you the chart I'm looking at.
Yeah, it was funny kind of how everybody forgot, because that happened and a bunch of us were in that room and we were just pumped about the deal, and it got up into the, the
Here,
13s, and then it was just nobody forgot about it, or nobody remembered it.
It just had one little green candle here on that significant, like that news foretold this news,
Right.
like that was to me, it was obvious good things are coming. I didn't know what it was going to be. I didn't know it was going to be they're pre-announcing the revenue and they're forecasting $1 billion. I didn't know that's what it was going to be, but I'm like, good things are coming, right? Like, so
Yeah.
I wasn't surprised. Yeah.
The CFO dropping 400,000 on buying. I don't remember how many shares was it, like 35,000 shares or something.
What was the date on that?
That was like literally right after the November 22nd press release.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I'd have to look back and see exactly when, but I mean, it was almost no time after that happened that there were some big insider buys. So massive votes of confidence.
Yeah. And I think that if you I remember, maybe I'll pull it up now, but these red candles here, and here were correlated with extreme sell-offs in ARK and the growth stock sector. And as I've been pounding the table on the idea that ARK is a proxy for all risk assets. I mean, I don't care what ETF we pull up, a biotech ETF, a small cap ETF, whatever it is, IWM. To me, it doesn't do it justice that ARK does. ARK has been amazing. It's like a stock market indice almost. And in fact, we'll do it. Let's see if I'm a liar or not. So that's my muscle memory talking. But if we zoom in, you'll see, well, it's been trending down the entire time. So a little bit of sharper move right here. Maybe this one, not so much, but we know last week, I really attribute this move to ARK, and this one also very sharp move in ARK right there.
It looks
right
exactly
here.
Exactly like ARK, especially
the had like a period of stability. There. You see this?
Right. Yeah. The only difference is that spike after the January 10th announcement. It spiked up and then it immediately got back into that ARK pattern.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And note here, stability is all you need for a successful like stock picking program, right? If you have a stock with good fundamentals, catalysts, whatever it may be, when markets are diving, it's not a good environment for that. But when they're stable, and ARK was stable for this period, it got its footing back, right? It got its footing back during the stability, and then, was able to go up and finally act on that good news from November 22nd right here. But then ARK takes a dive again. This goes down. We had tremendous good news. It's bucking the trend on ARK, but gravity took over with ARK again in the past week. So that's how I interpret this chart. And I don't know where it's going from here. We will collaborate with Rex to get an updated chart, but I do know he was talking about some, 20 plus number when it was, man, he was really surprised at this. I was having a little fun with him because you see this resistance here, right there, right? It couldn't get above this 200 moving average, and ARK was taking it down, and he was kind of pretty bearish on it. But when this news hit, we're talking about, can it break that? Yeah, can it break that resistance? And, he's a technical trader. I love him, by the way. He, unlike a lot of technical traders, he does try to consider fundamentals and catalysts, but his like the market's going down, biotechs are in bad shape, risk assets are in bad shape. This is going down lower. I'm like, dude, that press release this morning, I think this is the catalyst that's going to break the 200 DMA. So this is where I differ from like a technical trader. I'm looking for catalysts that can cause a resistance level of break. It happened. Unfortunately, it went back down 7 or 8 days later because gravity. This market's terrible.
It's everybody's getting murdered right now. So I'm not, obviously I'm in it for the long term. So I'm not really concerned about what it's doing right now. I will be interested to see when they talk on Q4. When they kind of flesh out some of these details a little bit more, to follow up the last couple of press releases that they've had, if that winds up being a positive catalyst or not, and And I do think it'll help to get some insight, hopefully, into their expenses for the year, because at some point, Orladeyo revenue is going to overtake their expenses, and Orladeyo revenue by itself is going to be able to fund all these trials that they have in the pipeline, and it's hard to say exactly when that is if we don't know what their expenses are moving forward. But at some point, that's going to happen.
I want to dig into that a little bit. If anyone has any questions, feel free to throw it in chat or raise your hand. We'll get to you. In the meantime, I mean, I don't have access to any professional research other than what I'm seeing on Yahoo Finance analyst tab, the analysis tab. The average analyst consensus estimate for revenue is 245 million. What did he say? They just guided for how much, Orladeyo?
They guided for Orladeyo alone. Now they're going to have other revenue. They've got another drug. I didn't even talk about it because it's pretty insignificant, right? I mean, in the grand scheme of things, in terms of revenue, I mean, Orladeyo is almost all of their revenue at this point. But they guided in that last press release for no less than 250 million for 2022.
No, just for Orladeyo, right?
Right. They said they're going to double their revenue for 2022 is going to double what they did in 2021. It's going to be no less than 250 million. So, and I mean, based on what I was saying with, the rate that they're increasing the revenue each month, when the rate of growth in the US starts to contract a little bit, I think that's going to be offset and mitigated by some of the rollouts in other countries. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them continue to have, 8 additional, 8 million in growth each quarter, which would get them to about 262. Not saying that's going to happen. I don't think that's unrealistic.
Okay, yeah, and probably these analyst estimates takes time to update. They probably haven't come out with all their updates because there's 13 analysts covering this. So with 13 of them,
some of those
I'm
are
sure
some of those are definitely old. Yeah. They were actually getting downgrades for a while. Going back to, and actually, I may be crazy in saying this. I swear, I think they had some analyst downgrades after their November 22nd press release. I really think they did, which is crazy. But I may be wrong on that. It might have been like just before. So I could be mistaken on that. I don't want to say that definitively. But
well, in any case,
I know some of those are out of date.
Right, and where I wanted to go is, I'm not a financial modeling person, so we don't know in terms of profitability when that happens. But with these 245 million as their midpoint, so that comes to an EPS loss of 95 cents in 2022, which is an improvement of $1.22 loss in 2021. So again, these numbers probably need to be updated by the analysts, but it's going in the right direction, and they have plenty of cash.
For sure. So, and it's hard to know where they're at from expenses with these trials. Now that they're enrolling patients and everything in the trial for the PNH phase 3. What are their expenses going to be like over the course of the year? And that's just what we don't know. We have a very good idea what their revenue is going to be, or at a minimum what they say it's going to be. But without knowing what those expenses are, it gets really, really hard to model out for the year.
Great. We got a comment from Ashley and a question. Excellent presentation, Ashley says, which is a big deal coming from him.
That is a big deal. I appreciate that.
What are your thoughts on the other earlier stage factor D mentioned in the Royalty Pharma PR? Some people turned bearish thinking BCX 9930 data was not good.
Okay, thoughts on the earlier stage factor D mentioned in the Royalty Pharma PR. Are we talking about the Royalty Pharma PR with when they were providing funding? What did they say about earlier stage factor D? I'm not sure off the top of my head.
Hi, Zach. It's Ashley.
Hey, Ashley.
Yeah, great presentation. This is a good core position for me. Been following your work. Yeah, on the November, the big Royalty Pharma deal. It's kind of midway through the presentation. They kind of the press release. It kind of slipped in there that they bought a revenue stream on factor D and an earlier stage, BCX 9930 and an earlier stage factor D, and was seeing a lot of sort of chatter on the internet, like, why do they need another factor D? Is it because BCX 9930 data isn't coming in as they hoped? Or I just assumed, I don't know enough, to know whether or not you need to have multiple ones. Maybe they do different things and serve different markets. I mean, Alexion's got, I think, multiple factor Ds. So I'm not too worried about it, but I sort of thought I'd ask, since I'd seen a couple of big players sort of turn negative because of that.
I remember that now that you mention it. And there was all this confusion about, well, wait, what is this other factor D? And it was an earlier version of it that was thought to maybe be inferior or something like that. So, yeah, I mean, and I'm not sure I had mentioned on the complement mediated diseases, that whole thing, the biochemistry of that's something that, and this is the kind of stuff that I nerd out on and get into, but like, that was something that prior to this stock, I was not familiar with at all. As far as there being an earlier version of the factor D inhibitor, yeah, I mean, you've got different drugs at different companies, and they're not all the same. I had mentioned the Solaris patent issue with Amgen. Apparently, the drug that Amgen is making and Alexion's Solaris were like biosimilar, and so there was a patent issue there. So there are different formulations apparently, and again, this is not something I'm an expert with at all, but there are apparently different factor D formulations. I have not heard anything about that earlier factor D since then. That was like the first time I had heard about it, and I've not heard anything else since then. So as far as I know, I mean, they're going full steam ahead with BCX 9930, but I've not heard anything about the other factor D. So I'm not really sure.
It isn't in their presentation, and it says, yeah, it's referred to as an earlier stage factor D, and maybe they just, so I don't know. It hasn't been, and it's not in their most recent SEC filings either. So maybe it's either an error in the press release, or it could just be that it's too early stage to even mention.
Maybe that's the case. I mean, I couldn't imagine it being an error in the press release. I mean, maybe, but yeah, maybe it could be that that you're right, that it's just still in development. They haven't run any trials yet because it's it's like pre-proof of concept at this point. That'd be my best guess, but I don't know. I haven't heard anything about it since that. I do remember reading that now, and I remember reading people on Twitter that were unhappy about it. So like, if you've got this great drug, this big, blockbuster drug in BCX 9930, why do you even need another one, right? But it could be too that, there's a bunch of other drugs out there in phase 2 or phase 3. And even though BCX 9930 is supposedly clinically superior in terms of efficacy and less side effects, it may be that they have something that is even better than that in development. I don't know. I mean, I'm just speculating at this point. But if they are aware of other drug developments by other, companies, they're going to roll this out maybe before some of these other companies do, and then they're going to have something on the back burner that they're working on to get out if something superior to BCX 9930 comes out. Again, totally guessing on this. I'm literally making that up off the top of my head. I don't know that that's the case at all. I'm just trying to, rationalize it.
All right. Thank you for that answer to Ashley. Ashley, thank you for your insightful question.
Sorry, I don't think that answered your question at all, Ashley, but I have no idea. I don't know.
Okay. So, maybe we'll talk about that further in our room. Don't see any other questions here. So just hang tight 1 second, guys. Was there anything else you wanted to add, Zach?
No, I think that's it, unless anybody else has any other questions or anything like that.
All right. So what we'll do then is we can continue the collaboration in the BCRX room. If you're a VIP member, Zach, thank you so much for that awesome presentation. I got to say, these meetings we have been really, really great for me personally, because you remember the days when we were all alone, right? I mean, there's Twitter now, but like being in a community, I remember all the different crashes I went through. I was like all alone trying to figure out what the hell to do, right? And
Yeah.
you know, the market crash can scare you out of everything, right? And I think this particular stock, I heard that presentation tonight, and it just gives me so much more conviction, because I'm not going to lie to you, I'm going through my portfolio every day thinking, what's a risk asset? What should I decrease and maybe use that money for more market hedge, right? And I went through and I looked at BCRX and maybe I should sell 10% of BCRX, right? I didn't do it last week. And now after hearing this presentation, I don't think I'm going to do it at all, right? So, you know, I think this is a great stock because it has a path to profitability and it's in a sector that's like recession proof. We're not even talking about recessions necessarily at this point, but you know, if that were even in the cards, you know, being in this industry, it's kind of recession proof, and you know, they don't have to worry about capital with higher interest rates. So I think this is a stock that is probably going to do well once markets regain its footing.
I hope so. I think so. And I definitely hope so.
Great. Thank you so much, Zach. VIP members, hang on. We have, if you're not a VIP member, you can head over to our website, check out our events coming up. You can follow us on YouTube and on StoryTrading. Now, what we usually do is trade of the week, but I got to tell you, last week, I did not submit any trade of the weeks. We're going to turn off the recording in just 1 second, just give a little preview to everybody. But, you know, these ideas that are coming in from the community are usually based on a catalyst and a combination of catalysts and technicals. Last week, we only had one pick submitted, which was very telling of kind of the environment we're in. And I'm going to echo that. I'm not submitting anything. I don't dare in this market environment to do some sort of catalyst, you know, driven pick for a swing trade. That's not the environment you want to be in. So what we're going to do is talk about the market and hedging strategies and things like that. What we'll do here for our VIP members. So hang on, guys. If you want to talk about that, we'll do that. Everyone else, thank you for joining.